Hello everyone, welcome back to the Bucket Think Tank. So, Ducktales recently finished its first season, and I've never been quite sure how I feel about it. So, I've gone over the episodes again, I've listened to people's opinion on it, and I feel like I'm missing something. And I always felt this was going to happen because when you reboot something, you always have to sort of attempt to appeal to the previous group that came before as well as create something new. And DuckTales 2017 did create something new, but I always felt like it was trying to be too much in its sort of premise because a lot of Easter eggs going through. There's a lot of callbacks to episodes and issues and other stories, a lot of remakes of other stories too, that I don't quite feel was ever going to mesh with exactly how this show has been formatted. The sense of humor I always felt was always a bit too far to undermine the tone, and it always feels like less of a sense of adventure and more emphasis on the character, and that's good, to be fair. We should never undercut our characters for the sake of the temporary adventure of the day, but we should always feel like we're amping up the adventure to make it interesting, and I don't quite feel any of it happens, primarily because the tone is never where it should be unless it's trying to go for something to emotionally gut wrench you. And that's what so we've already talked about my major issue, which was the same issue I had when I last did this video, which is about halfway through the first season. That I felt that, we weren't working on maintaining a set tone that wouldn't be undercut by humor. So let's just talk about everything else, which would be the characters and how our primary characters have dealt with this big mystery. So let's talk about each of our characters in groups and how they play off of it. So our first group will be who I think are the strongest characters in this new one outside of our main group. So that's Beakley, Webby, Fenton, Gyro, Lena, and Gladstone, along with Mark Beaks. I felt these characters were new. There was some new twists on them, some new takes. Gyro is sort of a modern day version of the inventor, the mad inventor. He's a bit unhinged, a bit socially awkward, and he's not very well-meaning, but he is fun to watch. I think he was one of the more radical changes, along with Fenton, who instead of being Scrooge's accountant is Gyro's intern, which I felt was good. It helps tie him to the Gizmo Duck story a bit better. Webby is sort of sometimes all over the place and sometimes very focused, which I like. Beakley is fun. She's not as funny as the previous Beakley, but I think that's a matter of interpretation. Gladstone was handled pretty well for all intents and purposes. I don't like Mark Beaks, but I understand his character, and I think I'm not supposed to like him, so that's fine. These characters, I feel, are sort of where the strength of the series really comes from, as well as Ma Beagle, who, while she hasn't had much to contribute to a story, she usually just happens to end up in the story. She's done a very great job of communicating that she is the real brain power behind the Beagle Boys, at least as of right now. We may see Blackheart Beagle, don't know. So there are some characters I have some problems with for the most part in terms of how they've been presented. Over the course of this season, they've had consistent appearances, which was one of my criteria for this particular group. So the Beagle Boys, Launchpad, Glumgold, and Magica, I felt was sort of the worst of our consistent characters. Primarily because these characters sort of undercut by their humor. At the bottom is Launchpad. Launchpad is, well, he's Seuss in this one, but I don't really get the idea of him being the seasoned adventurer or of even being that competent. Primarily because every time you turn around, it's a joke. He feels like he's never grown up, whereas with the other one, we did feel that he'd gone on his own adventures and whatnot. And granted, there was the episode where we met Gladstone, was an episode that sort of hinted that he had his own adventures, but it again came up more of like a joke. So he's stupid 99% of the time, but that 1% he's amazingly competent and focused. I don't know. The Beagle Boys have failed to be any form of threat or any form of planner in any level. And it was very disappointing because the Beagle Boys were always supposed to be that physical threat who could also come up with a really great plan, and they had the manpower to make it possible. That's why Magic and Glumgold always go to the Beagle Boys like, look, you've got the numbers, you've got the manpower, I've got the genius and the resources, so let's go. Here, it's just anyone's capable of either outsmarting or outfighting them. And I just sort of feel like it was a waste. Glumgold's been pretty consistent since we first talked about him in the DuckTales villains video we did, and he's funny. He's actually one of my favorite characters because of how hilarious he is. But at the same time, I find it hard to believe he's been the real threat to Scrooge that he tries to portray himself as, or as his history and other materials lets him off, makes him come off as. With Magica may be sort of the best worst of this group. Her build up was great. Catherine Tate did an amazing performance, and I'm hoping to see her again in season 2. But again, because of how the series likes to play it up to humor, she's nowhere near the same kind of threat. If you compare her to Magica in the 87 version, yeah, Magica gets defeated, and she has her own bit of humor, but there's never really the indication that she's not a threat, even after she's been thwarted. And I will give points to the change they made to her. She's an enemy of Clan McDuck, so she's a McDuck problem, not just Scrooge's problem. Though I do still miss the idea that she wants the number one dime. Overall, I always feel like these characters are hurt by the series always wanting to undercut its tone with humor, and it came really close to being that. It almost hit that right blend in the Shadow War, the season finale, but I don't know, it always felt kind of hit and miss, especially with these ones. So then we had our other characters. These characters I felt were a bit more of a problem because not only were they mostly one-of characters, they also felt like they could have been handled a bit better. Some were handled very well. So we're looking at Don Carnage, Goldie, Duckworth, the Terra Firmians, Doofus, and Darkwing Duck. I would say Duckworth and Darkwing are the best examples of this. The idea that Duckworth had died and can't come back as a ghost to just, resume his life as, I guess, the best version of Alfred ever, possibly. And with Darkwing Duck, being a TV superhero who more than likely in his cartoon, which I've heard we're getting, will be a cartoon superhero who decides to become a real superhero when a show gets canceled. Sort of like Bonkers, if you think about it. Doofus was the weirdest one, I think. I get it. He's like sort of traumatized by the death of his grandmother, but I kind of want to see more of him to get inside his head more, but at the same time I don't. I don't know. I expect to be the Junior Woodchucks. The Terra Firmians don't really count, if I'm going to be honest. The problem with the Terra Firmians was just the fact that they were such an iconic, I guess, monster, creature. Not just in the 87 cartoon, but in the comics, in Land Beneath the Ground. That was an amazing story. And here it just sort of feels like we're undercutting it. I don't know. Maybe that was always going to be one that I was never really going to appreciate. As someone who doesn't really care about Don Carnage, even in the 87 cartoon, I found this one to be a bit of a disappointment because there's nothing else to him other than the showmanship. He feels more like he dropped out of Juilliard and got a bunch of other Juilliard dropouts. Like, okay, look, so we're artists, so we shouldn't really have to pay for anything. So let's go and musically steal things from people. Yeah, it sounds cool. I'm not really a threat. That's the problem with Don Carnage in this one. He's a joke on just about every level, even the crew is. I don't get the idea that they're competent or that anyone even knows about. So coming up to our main characters, Huey, Dewey, Louie, Donald, and Scrooge, and of course the mystery of Della. So with Huey, Dewey, and Louie, I often felt like we need to sort of re-examine these three. And it might just be me nitpicking, but about halfway through the season, I already realized exactly where I'd seen their character traits from before. The idea that Huey, Dewey, and Louie had no real personality traits before, I think is a bit harsh, especially from the Ducktales perspective. Well, actually, it's really only in the Ducktales perspective that they have more of a personality. So in the 87 cartoon, there are 3 episodes that I think really help sum up the personality traits of Huey, Dewey, and Louie. So for Huey, it is the episode Sending the Clones. There are scenes when Huey's alone, and we see that he really is the planner of the group. He's the one with the ideas. And at the same time, we saw how well he goes to the Junior Woodchuck guidebook because he knows some of it from memory. He studied knot busting, and he had a very great plan to get out of that. It was a very great episode. If you haven't seen Sending the Clones, you're doing yourself a disservice. With Dewey, it's the Duck and the Iron Mask. That is the episode where Dewey is sort of fed up with being a triplet. He's tired of people mistaking him for his brothers, so he sort of goes all out to become his own independent, standoffish character, which is something that, this Dewey sort of is. He very much wants to be his own character. He wants to stand out. I think a lot of what he does is to help himself stand out. Louie would almost be tricky if not for the fact of the episode Much Ado About Scrooge, where Louie bonds and sort of wants to be a traveling salesman, someone who is very good at manipulating people to buy the product, buy what he's selling. And the salesman is sort of in it for himself until the very end. So, yeah, I mean, the real connecting thread between these three is Webby and Della. So that's sort of interesting, but it's really just Dewey and everyone else. Like, everyone else, all three of them have had a good chance to play off of Webby, but only Dewey's had a real chance to play off of Webby and the mystery of Della Duck, of their mother. I mean, there was a great moment in the secret parentheses S and parentheses of Castle McDuck, where we see Louis point out that, even the idea of keeping information about our mother a secret is like the ultimate taboo. I felt it was great. It always felt like maybe this should have always been the case. Maybe all three of them should have been searching for it. And then realizing that Donald and Scrooge were never going to tell, I think that would have been a much better way to get the point across. It did feel like this season was very Dewey focused. I think that goes without saying, and that maybe this first season was just Dewey sort of realizing his family is awesome. Like, he's got these crazy uncles, he's got these brothers, his friend, and all of it. And maybe this series will just be the nephews, interacting with Duckburg and their family. That'll be great. And that idea of this series is a success. Coming up to Donald, he's a bit of an oddity. And I think it goes back to the problem of the mystery that is the series. So this series likes to, point out that, Gravity Falls is the same animators that worked on Gravity Falls. And that's great, but the problem is Gravity Falls is also good because of how the mystery plays out and how it's connected to different characters. And how it never quite affects everyone the same way, and they don't all know the same thing. Grunkle Stan knows about the journals, but he doesn't know about Bill's cipher and exactly what his connection is to his brother. Donald is an oddity because he knows just about everything. And the series has to keep him out of it because if Donald finds out, he can answer all the questions. And Donald does a great job at times of hinting about exactly what happened to Della, whether it be the episode Woo, and which was, the hour long with the Atlantis adventure, when he mentions the spirit of Selene and the idea that Scrooge only cares about his adventure was great, as well as the episode The Spirit of Selene, when he talks about how in adventures people always end up getting hurt. Someone will always end up getting hurt. It's a great character moment, but the problem is they're so inconsistent. And again, it's because Donald can risk giving us too much information, while Dewey and Webby just sort of go off and find pieces elsewhere that actually don't really connect to anything. At the same time, Donald's focus within the series is sort of the problem. Like, a lot of ways the series is the arc of Donald, even though he's barely in it. Primarily because he learns to open up to Scrooge. Like, he has to have someone watch the boys, so he's like, fine, I'll go to Uncle Scrooge. And there's a bit of an argument, but they don't really talk about what the issue was. And I think in a lot of ways, Donald has already forgiven Scrooge for that. But when the boys are in trouble, it goes back to Della. And at the end, he's the one that really helps push the boys to forgiving their uncle for it. To me, it says that he knew, because we already know he knew. And I think the idea was that he already forgave Scrooge, as I said before. Coming up to Scrooge McDuck is he's increasingly and almost frighteningly overly competent. And by that I mean, if you go by just the season finale alone, he sort of took away all the tension from the magic fight. It's like if Scrooge gets here, it's over. Instead of it being like Merlin versus Madame Mim, it's more like Superman versus Steppenwolf. All right, so when Merlin shows up to save Arthur from Madame Mim and Sword and Stone, we still don't quite know how Merlin's going to get out of it. And he does, and it's really awesome. But in Justice League, when Superman shows up, we know Steppenwolf's done. It's already written there. We already know that there's nothing Steppenwolf can do. And this happened with Scrooge versus Magic. Once Scrooge is out of the dime, not only is he back in clothes he wasn't wearing, but he's able to just casually fight off Magica. And it was fun to watch, to be sure. I mean, for my favorite character, this was awesome, but it also kind of begged the question, is there anything that anyone can do? Because we saw this in the House of the Lucky Gander, when he just totally did not care about the spirit that kidnapped Gladstone. He was already totally in control. And I get the season adventure a bit, but it's like we've turned Scrooge McDuck into the love child of Mr. Peabody from Mr. Peabody and Sherman with the Doctor. and mash them together. And there's Scrooge McDuck, totally capable and totally at ease. And he's got a problem with how he fits into the mystery of Della Duck too, even though he already knows it all. The idea that he worries about Della, or he's horribly regrets it, and that he has pushed himself away. The series can't make up its mind if he's retired or if he's gone elsewhere. And the idea that, he still adventures, but he adventures alone, if that's the case, why is Mrs. Beakley surprised he's going off alone on his adventure to find Atlantis? If he's retired, why does he care? And the boys just sort of happen to arrive there and goad him by saying, you used to be a big deal. So he goes off to find Atlantis. And that's weird, because at the end of that episode, he's like, oh, you guys have inspired me to go on adventures, but you're already going to do that. So, yeah, I don't get that. And even more so, his interactions with the boys. If the idea is that he is somewhat worried about the boys, he should be the one freaking out the most when they're gone. Donald obsesses over Huey, Dewey, and Louie all the time. Scrooge would be someone who's like, I'm totally alright, I'm totally confident until they go missing. And that's never really communicated, or at least at all. Maybe in the Atlantis episode, where he's trying to tell all of them, like, you guys have to wait here, let me scout ahead. But an episode like the Mount Everest episode, he's pretty laid back about their safety. And even the Sun Chaser, Last Crash of the Sun Chaser, sort of throws in the idea that he's sort of looking after them to prove he could have kept an eye on Della, he could have kept her safe. But again, it's sort of awkwardly communicated, at least from my perspective. Overall, this season gets sort of a C-, at least from how the story and the characters intertwine. I think on its own, this is a higher grade, because the characters are, for the most part, well written. The tone is really my only actual problem. Like, if we take out the mystery, if the mystery wasn't solved this season, I think we'd probably be fine. But because of how the mystery plays off and how the season ends, we have to take into account everything else. And it just doesn't sort of gel properly. Like, a lot of the pieces sort of fit awkwardly and don't quite line up. Or maybe not. Maybe I'm missing something, and you guys have a better idea. Feel free to tell me that, because we're going to bring this video to a close here. I know I was a bit vague on Goldie, but I'm working on a video for her in about November. And I'll go more into Goldie there, because that'll be her comic book debut in the Life of Scrooge series we're working on. So with that in mind, we'll bring this video to a close here. If you're new to the Bucket Tank, feel free to like, comment, share, and subscribe. Check out some other videos on this channel, and I will catch you all later. This is the Bucket Think Tank signing off. May your fandom serve you well.